Okay, I'm just going to start because I don't want to really run out of time. So whoever is here and would like to participate, please feel free. So this is the last FMGR DR learning event, and I wanted to make this a little bit more interactive as compared to the last two, which was very PowerPoint focused. So for this session, I've decided to use Mentimeter, which is a fun tool to get students to interact and share their thoughts on concepts. So for those of you that are here and would like to participate, please feel free. For the last two sessions, I focused on the students' assignments and I focused on your study session 1. Now I'm going to focus on study session 2, but I want to stream that to relate to the grade R context. So to start us off, we're going to do the Mentimeter activity. And the first thing that I'm going to do is show you how to access Mentimeter. So we're going to be doing something called a word cloud. And the way for you to access the word cloud would be either to use this route and go through www.menti.com and use this code when asked to fill in the code so that you can participate. Alternatively, if you are an FMGR101 student and you have access to my, hold on one second, and you have access to my FMGR101 page. If you go down to live streams and recorded sessions, there are two URLs there. The first one we are going to be focusing on is lesson 5 and 6. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to click on this link and participate, or to use menti.com and participate. And I will, at 22, we will begin our first session. Good luck.
So Yuri, I just want to comment and say this is so cool that you're using a tool like this to get input.
I think I have to say thank you to you, Simon, for helping me to set it up. I was very nervous about it working, but it seems to be working really well. So thank you.
My pleasure. This looks great.
Okay, so participants, is there anyone else that would like to share, or can we move on? Okay, so I think I'm just going to move on. So looking at your contributions to this first presentation, a lot of you have a very senior sense of what patterns, functions, and algebra are. But from the basic grade R sense, we first need to look at the constructivism theory. When we look at this, we think of how students need to first work with concrete resources and develop their physical knowledge. Once they develop this physical knowledge, it'll allow them to gain a more tactile understanding of how patterns work. Because in grade R, we do not focus on number patterns, we solely focus on geometric, which is shapes patterns or color patterns. And we then want to move from that physical knowledge to a social knowledge, where they're able to describe and discuss the kinds of patterns that they're working with. They're able to tell you that this is a circle, square, circle shape, or this is a color shape of red, blue, and green. And once they're able to do this, we hope to eventually develop their conceptual knowledge so that once they look at a pattern, they'll be able to describe it, they'll be able to continue it, they'll be able to copy it. Okay? And then when you think about number patterns, this isn't linked to grade R, because in grade R, they only work with the numbers 1 to 10. And for them to follow a pattern of that, it's going to become quite difficult. So we start off firstly using concrete objects such as counting blocks, such as counting beads that have colors and shapes, and then we slowly move on to more complex patterns. Okay, so let's look at your next lesson. Present. So I'm going to give you a few more minutes to participate in this one. We're going to move on to something called space and shape for grade R learners. So when you think of space and shape in grade R, what comes to your mind? I'm going to give you a few more minutes for this. It's the same code to enter. Okay, so you have some really interesting concepts here. I hope that you all noticed that many of you have used the word position. So the way the word cloud works is that for those of us that share the same word, the word grows bigger to show us that we all share the same thoughts on the one concept. So the word position is quite common. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to still finish off their presentation, or can we move on? Okay, so let's share this presentation. Okay, so when you think of space and shape for grade R, position is a really important concept, and I'm glad that many people thought of this. Because when you look at position, it's not solely focusing on first, second, and third, but it's developing them to look at linking language with mathematics. So they have to understand how to explain where the position of an object is. So in this, we're trying to teach them on top of, behind, in front, and next to. So the best way to do this is to get them fully involved in your lesson. I remember when I was a student teacher and I was doing my grade R teaching practice, my mentor had this very fun activity where she would make them all get off their chairs and they would have to actually physically do the activity. So this is where the students would get up, well, the learners would get up and they would have to stand behind their chair. They would have to stand in front of their chair. They would have to duck under the table. They would have to stand on their chair, put their book on their chair, put their book under their chair. And once they developed this understanding of position, they eventually developed an understanding of direction, which brings us to our next concept. Students need to link the two concepts of space, position and direction. And the only way for them to do this is to physically do the activities. So as a grade R teacher, your job is to teach them through incidental learning. And the way that you do this is by getting them to use their full body to do the activity. So when you're doing a direction activity, it would follow the same procedure as doing a position activity, but you'd get them to use the whole classroom. So in this case, you could get them to work in groups, and then you could give them directions per group. So you could have one leader as the person being the leader of the group and giving directions, and the others are all following those directions. So you could make them go to a certain object in the classroom. Example, the blue group going from their desks all the way to the door, and they have to follow, going left, going right, which is nearer, which is further, which objects are to the left of them, which objects are to the right of them. And once they develop this understanding of direction, they can then move on to shape, okay? Because they've understood now the space around them, we're now moving on to shapes. So when you think of shapes, you're thinking of 2D shapes and 3D shapes, okay? They'll have some sense of 2D shapes, like your flat objects, like a circle and a square. Now you're going to move on to teaching them the concepts of 3D shapes. And in this section, you're going to be teaching them to understand what a 3D shape is, to be able to describe it, to be able to describe the shape, compare and categorize these shapes, okay? But the most important thing for you to teach them in grade R is to understand the edges of shapes, okay? To decide what is a ball shape and what is a box shape, okay? So if you think of circles, circles have no edges. So hence, this would be a ball shape. But if you think of a box is square in shape. It has edges, so it is a box shape. So how could you as a teacher demonstrate this to them? The best way to do this is to be as fun as possible. So you develop a ramp in your classroom. You get a big box, you use 2 planks as your ramp, and then you demonstrate. A ball is circular in shape, hence it's round, it has no edges, so it will roll down the ramp. But if you have a box and you slide the box down the shape, slide the box down the ramp, it has edges, so it would just slide. In that case, you're teaching them multiple concepts. You've taught them what edges are, what shapes have edges, what shapes don't have edges. You've taught them the concept of boxes and balls, but you've also taught them the concept of rolling and sliding. But you need to make sure that you do this in a slow and progressive way from simple to easy so that you don't confuse them. The other concept that you'd be teaching them about is basic symmetry. Now, when we talk about symmetry for young learners, especially grade R, we are solely focusing on basic shape symmetry and understanding that when they basically fold their shape in half, such as a circle or a heart, both sides would look the same. Okay, we're not doing too much of a complicated sense of what symmetry is. This will come in grades to follow. Okay, but as you teach, especially when it becomes more complex with space and shape, when you talk about things such as transformation, location, and visualization, you need to make sure that you simplify the terminology. Because if you use complex terminology such as translation, reflection, rotation, and symmetry, they're not going to understand what you mean. You're not going to achieve the outcomes for your lesson. So the best way to do this is to simplify your mathematical language whilst teaching the concept. So if you're teaching them the concept of rotation, you will use the term flipping an image to teach them the concept, but you'd also use a visual to show this to them. Because if you use the term rotation, you're going to confuse them. But if you use the term flipping, that would simplify your visual. I hope that makes sense. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at is Van Heel's levels of geometric thought. Now, this is a very complex thing for many students because I've had lots of messages about this. There's basically 5 levels of thinking associated with learning geometry. But for grade R, we are solely focusing on level 0, visualization. So what does this mean? That means you will teach the concept of transformation, but you will teach it in the very basic sense. You will not extend their knowledge too much because you are forming the basis knowledge for the following senior grades. But you need to make sure that your activities are hands-on, your activities are interactive, and they allow for the full learning experience of the concepts such as translation, reflection, rotation, and symmetry. Because once they have the full learning experience, that is when they move to the next level. They can't move to the next level based on their age group because they develop a more extended knowledge through their learning experiences and not how old they are. Okay, so I hope that this covers the basics of shape related to grade R. We're going to move on to lesson 7 and 8 now. So the way we've done the activities on Mentimeter for space and shape and patterns, functions, and algebra, we're going to similarly do this for lesson 7 and 8. So again, I'm just going to stop my share quickly. I'm just going to share either this code with you. You can either use menti.com or alternatively, you could use your FMGR page and go to the second link under lesson 7 and 8. So it follows the same concepts where you are going to be talking about what words come to your mind when you think of measurement in grade R and what words would come to your mind when you think of data handling in grade R. So we're going to start with the first one on measurement. I see all of you seem to think the rule is a great unit of measurement. That's interesting. Time. Okay, is there anyone that's still busy contributing? Okay, so let's look at the concept of measurement. Now, a lot of you have used more formal units of measurement, but when it comes to grade R, we tend to use something called arbitrary or informal unit. This is because learners have a very basic understanding of measurement, which becomes more complex later on. And us teaching them from the basic concept of arbitrary units all the way up to our more complex units of centimeters and mentimeters, which still confuses some of us, it will allow them to gain a more holistic understanding of the concept. So talking about the different concepts that we cover in math, in measurement, let's first look at the concept of mass. In maths, you're not going to teach them in kilograms and milligrams. You're going to teach them the concept of how light something is and how heavy something is. And the best way to do that is using a balancing scale with basic common objects. So you could fill a bag with some sand and put that on one end of the scale, and you could take like 3 construction blocks and put that on the other end of the scale. And then you're going to have to explain the concept of mass, of heavy and light. So you're going to see that the scale tipped to have the bag of sand at the bottom, and this is a heavier object compared to the 3 blocks, which is on the top end of the scale because it's a lighter object. And you could keep switching objects and get students more involved to understand the concept of heavy and light. When we talk about capacity, we're teaching them about the basics of full and empty, more and less. So the best thing to do is fill 2 buckets, and then you're going to have them describe how the buckets look. So there's more water in this bucket, therefore the bucket is more full. There's less water in this bucket, therefore the bucket is half empty. We're not going to obviously use the word half, that's a bad example. Let's talk about how empty the bucket is. If there's no water in the bucket, it's empty. If there's water in the bucket, it's full. If I pour more water in the empty bucket, that bucket has less water than the other bucket. Sorry about that. Moving on to length. Okay, this was a very fun activity that I did with my ITP students last year. I had them develop different utensils that they could use in their class to teach the concept of length to their learners. And this was really fun because some of them came up with some very creative ideas, one of which was toilet roll holders. So they measured things, they taped 5 toilet roll holders together, and then they measured either people or objects with that. Some used string, some used their handprint, so they cut out handprints and they measured how many hands was the size or something. So those are different arbitrary units you could use to measure length, okay? But the most complex one that you're gonna have to teach them is time. We're not actually teaching them the full concept of time and how to tell time. We're more focused on them understanding how their day goes, okay? So this is where they become conscious of sequencing events. The most common way that I've seen this being taught in classrooms is students have to describe their day, and then they have to explain what they do during the day and what they do during the night. And then we jumble up the pictures and then get them to sequence it. So you'd start in the morning from when they get up and get ready for school, come to school, go to aftercare, have supper and go home. And once they're able to sequence those events together correctly, they have an understanding of time, okay? We also teach them time through days of the week and months of the year, okay? If you look in your study guide, there are also different kinds of other arbitrary units that you could use to teach the concept of measurement in your classroom, okay? I'm just gonna quickly move on to the next section of data handling. So we're going to have you do the same thing for data handling. So you're going to use the code in menti.com and you're going to share what your thoughts are on the concepts of data handling in grade R. Okay, is there anyone else that's still busy? Okay, so when we look at data handling as a concept for grade R, it's very basic. In your study guide, you discuss 5 steps, 5 sequential steps to data handling that every foundation phase learner goes through when they learn about data handling. But for grade R, we only focus on 3 specific skills that we want to develop in there. Okay, the first one is for them to be able to collect and sort everyday data. So an example of this is when you give them a container of counting beads and you get them to sort it by color. Okay, so they would have a pile of red, a pile of green, and a pile of yellow. And once they've done this, you want them to then develop the skill of representing this data. So this is grade R. So you're going to use the most basic level. We can't use graphs, we can't use tallies, and we can't make them analyze this data because they're so young. So the best way to do this is to get them to draw pictures. So they're going to have their page in front of them, and then they're going to draw a picture of their red beads, and then count. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red beads, and then they're going to write the number 5 in their block. And the third skill we want to develop with them is discussing this data collection. So they must be able to explain to you what their findings are. So they're going to say, okay, teacher, I counted my red beads and I put them here. I counted my yellow beads and I put them here. And now on my page, I drew out, I have so many yellow beads and I have so many red beads. This is the most basic form of data handling that we do with them. We do more incidental data handling when we introduce the topic to them. Like you have to make them guess how can you do this? For their birthdays, that would be a good one. For their birthdays, when you have your morning ring session, you could make them guess, okay, I have my birthday in May. Okay, so how many of them have their birthdays in May? So you're going to do a little counting tally on the board, and then they're going to count. 5 of us have our birthdays in May. The most basic form of data handling. We don't do very extended knowledge on this because this is done in the higher foundation-based grades. Okay, everyone, so that brings us to the end of our study session 2 grade R feedback session. I wanted to keep the last few minutes for any students that have questions, anyone else that has questions about what we've done so far, or if they have any questions about the assignments.
Siri, hi. We've got a question from YouTube.
Okay.
Mandy asks, when you give a math lesson for grade R learners, should there be substations together with the main lesson?
Sorry?
She asks, should there be substations together with the main lesson? I think maybe stations should be lessons. So she's asking, when giving a math lesson for grade R learners, should there be sub-lessons together with a main lesson?
Yes, so basically you have one concept that you want to teach, and then you break it up into smaller activities from the basic understanding to a more progressive understanding that you do over a week. That is how I teach it.
Great,
and then
thanks, Sayuri.
Obviously when you teach a maths lesson, you do your normal grouping. So you have your teacher guided activity where you're teaching your new concept, and then the other groups are doing some recapping concepts of what they've previously done.
Got it. Thanks, Sayuri.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so basically students, for those of you that are going to be watching this as a recorded session, from session 1, you're going to use the knowledge, you've already used the knowledge because you submitted your counting gallery walk. So you've used your knowledge of numbers, operations, and relationships. And you've also used your knowledge of mathematics for all because you spoke about prevention models and the RTI model, and that's going to be part of your research assignment. So now after study session 2, you're going to watch this video, you're going to watch your assignment video, and you're going to go back and develop your research on your other 3 assignments. Simon, there's a question. Oh, for our gallery walk and activity plan, must we choose an informal unit to teach, or must we find out? You must pick one informal unit. So you're going to decide on which concept you're going to teach and which informal unit you want to design for that. So example, if you're going to be using length, you could use the toilet roll idea.
Thierry, another question from YouTube.
Okay.
Shazia asks, for the maths essay assignment, will students be penalized for going over the word count?
No, they won't.
Thank you.
Okay, so study session 2 should help you with the rest of your assignments. Please feel free to contact us if you have any more FMGR questions.